new cases of of someone being reinfected. So what does that mean post-vaccine? Once there is a vaccine, if you can get reinfected. Dr. Raywat Deonandan is an epidemiologist at the University of Ottawa, a great contributor to our broadcast here, and he joins us now. Hi, Raywat. How are you?
I'm well. How are you?
Good. What do you take from this case in Hong Kong, where I believe he traveled to Spain after being infected in Asia? He was well, then traveled to Spain, came back, and was positive again.
Okay, so we've had several reports of reinfections over the past few months, and most of those have been erroneous. They've been the result of testing failures. I don't put a lot of weight on them. This one looks like it might be genuine. And keep in mind that he fully recovered, but 4 months later was reinfected with what we think was a different strain of the virus, and also had no symptoms a second time. So it was lesser affected. It was a less serious version of the disease. So what does this mean? Well, it means some things, but not as many things as you might think. Keep in mind, there's a reason we studied the bell curve back in public school, if you remember that.
Yes.
The bell curve tells us that, almost every human characteristic is a shared characteristic for most of the people, but with a large enough sample, you're going to get a couple of outliers.
Right.
So now we have a global pandemic with millions of people infected. You're going to get a handful of people with a different response. So all of that is to say that this is not a common occurrence, and I'd be very surprised if we see this happening more often. Now, what does it mean, though, for vaccine development? Well, we always prefer artificial immunity via a vaccine than natural immunity via actual infection and recovery. And one of the reasons for this is with a vaccine, we can titrate and figure out how to give a prolonged period of immunity, more so than an actual viral infection will give. So we can give a bigger dose or several booster shots to make sure that you have immunity lasting many months, if not years. Whereas a recovery now seems to give you immunity for a few months. Maybe that's it. Maybe you only get 4 or 5 months out of this. So I wouldn't worry that much about it. When the vaccine comes, and if it's a proper vaccine, we should be able to deploy it in such a way that most people are protected for many months, if not years.
And I mentioned the other day on the air that I saw Bill Gates speaking with The Economist talking about, and he's heavily involved in or funding some of the research, and he is very optimistic about the viability of these vaccines once they are ready. Several of the 6 he mentioned he believes are going to be quite effective. Are you hearing that as well, or is it just too early?
No, I'm hearing the same thing, and I know I'm very much an optimist. I always err on the side of positivity, which is my undoing at times. I agree with him. I think it's extraordinary the amount of progress being made on the vaccine front here, and they're all looking so good and so safe for the most part, and we'll know better when the phase 3 trials come back, but I fully expect to have this under control within a year, given the vaccine potency.
Which is extraordinary, and everybody, I think that part of the suspicion or the negativity or the pessimism from the public is about the fact that there has been so much bad news and so much lack of control in their lives, and their lives have been upended. When they hear someone say the end is near or at least within sight, they're naturally now prone to dismiss it and or not pay as much attention to it. But there is positive news out there, particularly on vaccines.
Oh, yeah. And by the way, I actually think we should err on the side of caution and vigilance and pessimism, because if the vaccines don't turn out to be the great godsend I expect them to be, then, the disappointment will be profound. So let's hope for the best, plan for the worst.
Tell me about rapid home tests for COVID, and are they worth pursuing? Because I gather that Health Canada has shown some resistance.
Yeah, so this is back to the old paradigm-shifting ideas of how we think about these tests, and it's frustrating to me. I'm a big fan of the at-home testing, of any kind of testing, even the low-sensitivity test that the at-home test will probably be. So the reason that Health Canada is hesitant to okay them and to pursue them is they're stuck in this paradigm where every test must be diagnostically perfect.
Right.
Just like masks must be diagnostically perfect, and we cannot trust the public to use them improperly, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's time to expand our way of thinking. So the role for the at-home rapid test, when they come, and by the way, the work is being done to get them to the market as quickly as possible, is not the same as the role of the clinical swab tests, which are a solid diagnostic test that tells us whether or not you are infected and therefore should be quarantined. The role of the at-home test is to give people some guidance in their lives. So the lateral assay at-home test, if it does end up existing and being available, allows you to spit on a piece of paper like a pregnancy test and tells you whether or not you are infectious on that day. If that compels you to stay home, well, that's a good thing.
Yes.
The danger, of course, there are two dangers. One is if you test positive, we will never know about it likely, and therefore we are denied that data, which is important for planning for the pandemic. And number two is if you test negative, it's not a perfect test, so you may be going about your life under the assumption that you're not infectious when you probably are. Right. So there has to be a lot of caveats built into this. A low sensitivity specificity test has some dangers with respect to communication, but that can be managed through appropriate public health deployment of communication tools and so forth. So I think it's a failure of imagination that prevents us from pursuing these things with more vigor. I look forward to the day when we can do a test at home and know whether or not to send your kid to school, for example.
Because right now, you're waiting to feel something, and you might not feel something. And even if these tests aren't like the swab tests, they do give some indication. They could give some indication of whether you're infectious.
Exactly right. Now, the danger, of course, is a false sense of security and a false sense of infectivity, if that's the case. But that's okay. We can manage that, in my opinion. So, I mean, if this is going to be the new normal for many months, if not a couple of years, then we have to have all these tools on the table that allow us to manage our day-to-day activities. Simply relying upon the diagnostic test in the lab is not going to get that done.
And is the government moving? Is Health Canada moving on this or no?
To my knowledge, they are not moving on it. But I think, they've changed path before. I mean, masks are a good example. Yeah. So I have faith that when the technologies become more widely available and understood, we'll understand better how to use them, and then people's eyes will be opening. Oh, that's what we meant. They're not diagnostic tests, they're surveillance tests. And there's a different way of thinking about those kinds of tests.
Before I let you go, what are you telling friends, family, colleagues who are parents who ask you, is it okay to go back to school?
I tell them it depends where you live. And how your community caseload is. All this depends on how the incidence rate in your community is, and also what precautions are being made in your school. For the most part, the overwhelming majority of kids and families are going to be fine. This is not an individual risk situation. It's just that when you scale this up to 10,000 schools and hundreds of thousands of kids, someone's going to get infected, right? So we're looking at a population basis. Individual families should not panic.
Always good to talk to you. Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you.
All right, that's Dr.